For many years, Elon Musk said he doesn't care about China. And he's also very worried about China stealing his technology. Zuckerberg's wife is ethnic Chinese. Google was kicked out from China, and Apple's company, 12 young workers committed suicide by jumping from the building. Intel provides the first and perhaps the most important censorship software and equipment to China. The worst project Bill Gates involved is China's nuclear technology.
Namaskar. I'm Sri Iyer of PGurus, and this is our continuing conversation with Sasha Gong on characters who are having links with China. And today, we're going to take a look at something that's very near and dear to me, Silicon Valley. I live there, so I'm sort of taking a critical eye at some of the people who have made it big in the Silicon Valley and how they have benefited from their links with China. So without further delay, let's welcome our guest of the afternoon, Sasha Gong. Sasha, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Hello, everybody.
Sasha, the two episodes that we've done thus far have reached a lot of thousands of viewers, extremely well received. They have been full of praise for Sasha's way of explaining things, elucidation, I must say. See, I'm always searching for the right word, and you've been very
pleased. Thank you. Thank
you so much. So today, as always, let's start jumping straight into this. We are looking at the red-handed book as some sort of a guideline, but what we are going to do, you're not going to find it in that book. So this is sort of like our and Sasha's journalism of many decades coming into play here. He's going to regale us with a lot of stories. So Sasha, without further ado, I'm going to take you to the book. Here's a book. Would you like me to jump to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Here we go. All yours.
Today we are going to talk about the Silicon Valley. In Peter Schweizer's book, Red-Handed, the first big chapter, after the preface, after the forwards and preface, I think, is about the Biden family. The second one is about members of Congress. And this chapter is about Silicon Valley. So those who are familiar with the books actually would know I'm not going to follow Peter Schweizer's flow for a very simple reason, because he only provided a sketch. He has limited space in the book, and I also have limited space in the show. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put a sort of a bigger picture than corruption itself. He mentioned how much Silicon Valley people take money, how much money they took, and for a few projects. And I'm going to expand it a little bit and going to use examples and familiar name for our audience, and I hope you like it. And if you guys have more questions, put in the comment section and see if we can later answer the questions. Are we going to the next slide? Or
Yes. I was waiting for your command.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Here, what we see in this slide are familiar people. You see Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and all the people. And you can actually, the easy way to think of the familiar people, the names you have heard for 3 decades now, and you just name a list. It's everybody. Only a few people, very few, perhaps 1%, who are not working with China and with the Chinese government, who does not have business in China. But for example, let me take the latest example, as Elon Musk. For many years, Elon Musk said he doesn't care about China. He was very critical to the totalitarian regimes. And he's also very worried about China stealing his technology. But in the past few years, Elon Musk opened a factory in Shanghai. Why? What about his worries? And he actually said a few very good things about China. So he's perhaps the latest tycoon who established a partnership with China. And China lured him in and That's a very beautiful example. I think you guys may want to hear that first, but I'm not.
Yes,
I'm not.
yes.
I'm not going to delay the talk it first. Elon
Yeah.
Musk, when he first said he did not want to deal with China like other tycoons, and China very much wanted his technology, everything. Not only the electric cars but in satellite, which is invaluable, right? So I think in 1925. China lured Elon Musk in by offering him to open a factory in Shanghai under several very unique conditions. First, he could open a factory without any investment.
No
The
capital.
Chinese bank,
Zero capital.
no capital, $900 million. Every penny is invested by the Chinese government. And second, he can own that by 100%. You see, the funny thing is that, China, the way China took other people's technology is the Chinese law. Any foreign companies, if they open a business in China, they can only own 49%. And a Chinese partner, usually the state company, owns 51%. By that, China took Western technology by having Western investment. The technology transfer is a very big issue. And Elon Musk actually got a very unique, the conditions China offered him is almost unthinkable. He had got 100% ownership of that Shanghai company. He needs to put zero money in as the investment because the Chinese national banks picked it up. And he also got very, very good, unthinkable tax benefit. I think it's like he doesn't need to pay tax until 2024, something like that.
So 5-year tax holiday or something.
Yes. And so he invested in China. He changed his attitude towards China. Guess what happened? Also, another condition, which is favorable or unfavorable, depends on your perspective, is his company has to produce every part of his car in China, unless China could not produce like some chips. Anyway, what happens that in a few years, China produced 35% of Tesla in the world. That's a national strategy.
I'm understanding the significance of what you just said. And this is playbook of China, force the guy to do everything in China, so they get to know every little nut and bolt that goes into Tesla. And lo and behold, Tesla has been completely Chinized, Shanghaied.
Yes, that's a national strategy for 30 years, especially after 2000 when China joined WTO. And if you trace all the things back, but it's much easier to understand why the Silicon Valley tycoons want to invest in China. Why would they? Well, even when China censored them, even when companies like Twitter, Facebook, Google could not be shown in China, they could not operate in China, but they entered China anyway. The company entered China. And China wants the company, not the freedom. So anyway, that is one example. These are the familiar faces. And Bill Gates has been in China for a long time. Yeah, Bill Gates had great investment and worked with many Chinese companies. And of course, Zuckerberg. That's one interesting story, which is very well known in China because the Chinese state media publicized it. And it's also Peter Schweizer mentioned it in his book. Zuckerberg's wife is ethnic Chinese. Chinese President Xi Jinping went to visit this. I think it's in Seattle, in Seattle. Zuckerberg went to meet him. At that time, his wife was pregnant. So he asked Xi Jinping, said, could you give the Chinese name to our child? I think Indian people may also, we may have shared similar tradition. It's when you ask someone to name your child, that's the possible greatest honor you give the other side.
Yes.
Yeah. The good thing is that, well, Xi Jinping, who was only educated for 5 years, and he did not know he could not think of anything. He did not know how to answer. He said, "Oh, sorry, I think not." So anyway, turned down his offer. And also another time, when we called Internet Czar, a guy named Lu Wei, last name Lu, first name Wei, Internet Czar, which also means in the Chinese context means censorship czar, went to visit Facebook headquarters. Zuckerberg let him sit behind his desk. And then on that desk, he saw a book. It's a book by Xi Jinping. It's a book every Chinese leader knows. So, oh, well, and Zuckerberg just immediately said, this is not for a show. This is not for you. This one, I actually gave everybody in my company, every managers in my company, Xi Jinping's book. So that's how much you want to kiss them up. I use the better language. So that's the people page. Let's go to the next slide. Google was kicked out from China, and Google, it's a more complicated story because Google once said they protest, they will keep freedom of speech, but they did not. Anyway, so let's go to the companies.
Yes.
Well, in China, you see every possible US companies there. The biggest one, of course, is Apple. Apple produced its cell phone in China. Well, I'm talking about a few years ago, not now. China assembled Apple cell phones mostly in China. And a few years ago, I think it's about 5 years ago, the Chinese actually got $11 for every product.
That's it?
That's it. Very astonishing. Well, you make some money, but not that much. And Apple, the biggest Apple assembly center is in southern China, near Hong Kong. So because of Apple paid that very little, at that time, the company worked young people to death, really literally worked them to death. So what happened is that in 2012, it happens in the Apple's company. The young workers felt so desperate and worked so hard, and they're so tired of life. Within a few months, 12 young workers committed suicide by jumping from the building.
Oh my God. I remember this.
Yeah. You actually don't see Facebook there, but you see their companies there. We are going to talk about the operations of their company.
Right.
But Apple is the biggest, the company-wise, operation-wise, Apple has the biggest operation, I believe.
Sasha, let's finish that thought there. 12 young people jumped from the building and died. How did they rectify this problem?
Well, you see, I visited several Chinese companies when I once worked for AFL-CIO, so that was my job. You see, the Chinese set up huge companies, huge. In some companies under one roof is more than 100,000 workers, that kind of huge companies. In some on some farmland in relatively remote area. Let me explain first one thing about, let's compare India and China. When you look at Indian development and any third world country, Brazil and other country, you'll see a huge slum problem. When you need workers, peasants came in and they became workers, they have no place to live. in the city. So what they do, they build slums, and that create all sorts of problems, hygiene to say the least, and hunger, crime, all kinds. So the entire world would point out at those governments that, look at you, what have you done? Look at how you treat your poor people, right? And those companies and the products had terrible reputation. China took a very different model. And well, let our audience be the judge to say what that means. China, under Mao's rule in before the 1980s, China had the sort of a two-tier household registration system. If 20% of the people lived in cities, it's a big privilege. If you live in the cities, the government mostly guarantee you have employment and housing, not much housing, but you have housing. And you can't wandering around begging, and those are all illegal. They would arrest you, right? So you look at the Chinese cities, it's much more cleaner than any developing country cities. Meanwhile, 80% of Chinese people live in countryside. They were not allowed to travel to cities unless they have government approval. The approval came very rare. They could not stay in cities, and they have all kinds of problems. So peasants remain in countryside. They could not get employment in urban areas, in factories. And remember, in that time, factory income was between 5 to 10 times higher than rural income in countryside. So when China opens up, when the foreign companies move in, the Chinese begin to allow some people to work in factories with one condition, a very, very easy condition. First, you have to come as single people. You cannot come as a family. You cannot come say, okay, I'll come with my wife, my kids. No, government would not provide you with housing. What government did instead was build huge factories and allow peasants who were desperately poor to work in factories. They built dorms for them. So I visited factories. They would have like between 8 to 12 young workers living in one room and work. And then what also happened is the Chinese government would not allow people to wander around. They would build factories in remote areas. I give you one example is that once I visited
Sasha, I have been to such factories. In a place
China.
called Tangsha, Guangdong province. Yeah.
Guangdong province, I see it, in that area. Yeah. One factory I went to had 8,000 workers, a shoe factory, right? And the workers lived there, they're young workers between the age of 14 to 25, cream on the top of laborers. And then what happened is that I asked them, why don't you go into the city and, walk on the street and have some fun? They said, no, every day they only have 2 buses going in town. That means only like less than 100 people would be able to go to town. You can't walk, you have to walk for a whole day to town. So the workers lived in the factories, the young workers. And another thing is that the young workers, most in the light industry, like clothing and in the assembly line, most workers were female workers, young female workers. But in construction site, 90% of the workers were male. So you have a female and male extreme unbalance. And people could do nothing but working for 80, 100 hours a week to earn more wage. That's why, after a few years, a lot of people got depressed. That's how the 12 the 12 workers. That's why the 12 workers jumped to death.
So,
I'm not sure if I made myself clear. Yeah.
No. What I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say was, did the conditions improve after that, so that people didn't have to get worked to death, like the way they were experiencing? Did their conditions improve? Were there some laws put in place so that, like, maybe instead of an 80-hour work week, maybe 60-hour work week or something like that? I was
Yeah.
just curious about that.
I was part of the force to push for the change, and the Chinese government later made a law to limit overtime to 36 hours a week. However, it's a big
even that's
however.
quite high. Even that's quite high.
Yes, but after that, 36. These are young people. What are you going to do in weekends? What are they going to do? It's still a very difficult experience. So that's how China built its industry, and it's quite a miserable story, because it's not because the Chinese want to work in such condition, and the Chinese can endure more. It's because the peasants used to be so poor under communism. So that's what happened in China. We're going back to Apple. That's how Apple could pay only $11 per cell phone for assembly.
So what you're
It's
saying,
very
Sasha, if I
low.
understand you correctly, is that Apple built their phone, which I'm also a proud owner of, for practically nothing.
Yes. The condition of the Apple factory was one of the best.
And still people died.
Under,
yeah.
Oh, yes, but Apple is under extreme international scrutiny at that time. And even now, all the foreign firms are, Nike and Reebok, you talk about all this. And it's much better than factories produced for domestic consumption, believe me.
Oh, that's true even in India. And I mean, that's a way of life. People do try. There are more labor-friendly laws in India. But at the same time, what you said is true. The top-tier companies do have top-tier manufacturing facilities. Let's not make two bones about it. It is true. Yeah. So let's go back to the next company, Facebook.
Facebook was never allowed to be in China. Even Facebook's Zuckerberg tried so hard. He went to China, he made his morning joggle passing Tiananmen, and he gave his workers Xi Jinping's work. The Chinese government said they love him, but Facebook is not allowed.
I heard he can speak Chinese too.
He learned, he tried to learn Chinese, and he tried to make himself appear friendly. China is a huge market, but Facebook is working with the Chinese in other ways. Facebook company, the company itself, is working with China in big data projects. That says all. All these companies we are talking about here, Google, Intel, and so we are going to talk about it later in the social control part, how they use big data, what do they do.
So would you like me to skip to the next slide now?
Yes, let's go to the next slide.
Here we go.
Yeah. And as I said, all these companies, many internet giants are content companies. They talk about Google, the search engine. They're talking about Twitter, Facebook. They provide content. They sort of pride themselves as platform for freedom of speech, which is not true. We know it's not true after the 2020 election, right? But in China, all these companies openly work with the Chinese government. And so I want to go first that why would they do that? Why would they go to China? They're so keen to work with China. I think it comes to a very basic ideology. All these companies, if you listen to them, they pride themselves as global companies. they don't see themselves as American companies. They don't see patriotism is a principle. They see, well, China is one of the countries, America is, and they don't see the difference between China and America. What they see, if you listen to them, Apple's CEO Tim Cook and Zuckerberg, they all said that China is a much more efficient country. Why is it efficient? Well, because the communist government can make decisions in a split second like that. The government does not need to consult anyone like their people, their Congress. So they're much more efficient. Many of this the high-tech tycoons went to China. They're awed by the efficiency. They said, okay, we may want to work with this company. Sure, let's make a call. And the leader, whoever they met, asked the secretary, make a call to this company. Next, say the company head is here. So let's sign an agreement to work on this, work on that. So we are talking about hundreds of thousands such contracts working between high-tech companies and the Chinese companies. So one thing about the major difference here, if you try to understand, not to condemn, or the American big tycoons, they think they are global companies, and they think they are working with Chinese companies, and they think the Chinese companies are like them. They're global companies because even not that many, Zuckerberg, yeah, a little bit, but not many of their people can speak fluent Chinese. There are plenty, almost every executive, high-tech executive in China speak fluent English. Educated in America, they know how to work the appearance American way, but more efficient. So the ideology here is that, well, the big tech companies think we are big tech, they are big tech, we are global, China and America. Why not? However, if you look at the Chinese companies, they don't see that. And lots of companies look like private companies, but they are not. Several things. First, even they are private companies, without the state backing, they would not be able to survive. For example, the Chinese giant Huawei, the big telecom company. Huawei is supposed to be owned privately. But if anyone is familiar with the Meng Wanzhou case, the Huawei, Chinese call him Huawei princess. She was CEO of Huawei, the daughter of Huawei's founder, who was accused by America for, selling equipment to Iran and writing. Anyway, if look at her treatment, how the Chinese government backed her and backed the company. That's not a real private company. Even it's a real private company, without big Chinese government backing, they cannot survive. It is that simple. Go ahead.
Sasha, you have to help connect the dots here. So she flies into Canada. She's imprisoned there. She was supposed to be extradited to the United States. Somehow, Canada managed to hold off on that. And then suddenly, 2 Canadian citizens are caught in China. And then there is a quid pro quo. There's a quid pro quo. And she flies back. She flies home, and these 2 Canadian nationals are freed. Now, the $1,000 question, I shouldn't say 1,000, it's a $1 billion question. The $1 billion question is, did she admit to what Huawei had done, A, and B, how did the US let her go?
Okay, first, she admitted to some very minor things, which was not enough to hold her in prison. Second, she was held not in prison, actually at home. She was with that
house arrest.
Sort of house arrest, and she was held by the Canadians with the request of the Trump administration. She was released by the Biden administration. That's all. That's a very clear connection here.
Yes, and Sasha, I have been hammering away on this. So for America, depending on who's in power, America's adversary changes. Under Biden, it is Russia. Under Trump, it is China. I'm at a loss for words. I'm at a loss for words when I see that, how stupid the politicians of United States think we are. Anyway, that's just my
It might not be stupidity. It might be something worse. Might be self-interest. Might be individual interest versus national interest. That's what we see here. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess let's get back to our
right. So we're talking about the ideology. So if you look at this, well, even if we take the Silicon Valley tycoons' word on face value, we say, okay, we believe you honestly think you're global companies. You don't need to be loyal to America, right? The Chinese companies never think so. When the Chinese work with American companies, with foreign companies, they always think of their own national interests. Otherwise, they cannot survive. That's first level. And second level, Chinese government has the power at any time, it's by Chinese law, to demand all these companies to serve national interest. And which means they are, by law, they can be requested to be spies.
And they signed up for that. The American companies signed up for that.
Well, the American companies signed up for their partners who, by Chinese law, can anytime when the government requests, they can be spies, they can work, they have to work for national interest.
This is the point where, something's fallen, the penny drops sort of thing, Sasha. Do you know that there are software companies today that coach candidates who are going to go for interviews into the FANG companies, FAANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. There are companies, there are software that people write that they coach you, they train you as to how to take these interviews and get hired there. And here, these companies go and they are basically giving away their firstborn, in my opinion.
Exactly. And the way is that either they are truly that innocent or they just pretend they don't know. And the Chinese system, if you think of the whole system in China, if you work for the universities, a university can not simply say, okay, I work with this company, that company. The Chinese government must give them assignments or the agreement and say, Google and Twitter and all these companies work with Chinese universities. And universities, China has dozens of trainings, different training, high-tech training centers in different universities. The top one is Tsinghua University, called China's MIT, right? And they have an incubator there, a huge building, an incubator. And all these foreign companies incubate Chinese entrepreneurs. In fact, they are actually working with the military, with government, with police, whatever, you can name it.
You have to rid me of another doubt. This one is going to be probably one of the best episodes that we have done. Very respected person from India basically told me, look, Xi Jinping has a chemical engineering degree from the prestigious Tsinghua University. What are you talking about? That he hasn't even finished grade 5. And I was basically repeating what Elmer said. So I'm like, okay, listen, this is what this person says. Elmer, what do you have to say? And Elmer said, listen, Shri, when these heads of state come to either it is Harvard or Tsinghua, there is another person who is doing their degree for them. Sometimes there's more than one person doing their degree for them. How true is this?
Very true. First, to us Chinese, it's come from, it's from instinct, we know. First, Chinese universities, Mao closed all the Chinese universities in 1966, and Deng Xiaoping reopened them in 1978 So for 12 years, universities were not really operating. Yet, starting from 72, they picked some young people to attend universities. But most professors were in labor camps. So they went there and study and they graduate. In those years, students learn almost nothing. So when you look at the Chinese always have one way to ask them, said, hey, when do you graduate? When do you go to school? So, oh, I went to school in 1973, university. The Chinese immediately would say, oh, in that time they would call worker, peasants, and soldier students. Because all the students came from workers, peasants, and soldiers. And that means you did not actually learn anything. You did not need to pass an exam. You are handpicked by party leaders to go to a university which teaches you nothing. That's what happened. And she went to university, I think, in 1973. And a lot of young people from high-ranking government officials' families did. So that's what he did. And then later he got so-called PhD. Somebody else, but that was not in chemical engineering, in some political science study, something. Somebody else wrote his dissertation. It was on the record. At that time, he was already an important party leader. So for all those people who have PhDs, even they themselves hesitate to show up their PhD.
Okay, so shall we go to the next slide, Sasha?
Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Here we go.
Let's
Censorship. Very important.
Censorship. Yeah. Well, all these companies, what they do in China. So we are talking about Google, Apple, Twitter, and Facebook, and all these YouTube content providers. Well, first, China did not allow them to exist in the Chinese web. China has a great firewall. So it was out of question. Google was there for a very short time, and then China said, okay, forget it. You're not here. And even when Google said, okay, we follow your rules. So all these companies, what happened instead, the Chinese sent people to their companies, helping in the sort of a Chinese side, Chinese language side. Then they help them to censor people outside China, not only inside China. Let's say there's several people we need to, it's worth mentioning. And let's say there was a woman whose name is Fei Li. I remember last name Fei, last name Li, Li. She's now in Stanford, but she once worked as, she was in Google's board, and she was also work on the Chinese side of Google China. I forgot what's her title, but anyway.
That's fine,
She was in China. She was in charge of Google's, the China side. And she joined Google for only less than 2 years. And what she did, it's interesting. What she did was she helped China to get Google's technology on AI, artificial intelligence. So we know AI is a key area. The Chinese care about AI a lot, and China now claim they are better in AI than America. Anyway, she's a key figure to get the Google AI Center, which transfer artificial intelligence technology to China. And she's still in Stanford. So I think that's a good example. Google is working with the Chinese on artificial intelligence. Even Google's search engine is not in China. I don't know how many companies Google work with them, but that's one extremely important field Google is working on. The second example I want to give is a woman whose name is Cathy Chen, Chen. Chinese name, last name Chen, first name Kuai, Kuai, but the English name is Cathy Chen. Cathy. Google, I believe it's in 2016 or 17. Twitter appointed her as someone who was in charge of Chinese Twitter, all Chinese Twitter. This woman, Kathy Chen, was in charge of Twitter's all Chinese site. You see, what happened is that after she got in charge, she helped Google to launch all sorts of censorship. After she got in charge, a lot of people, the Chinese language people outside of China, found out their tweets got censored. If you say something which is not that friendly to the Chinese government, and suddenly you got a warning. Even today, nowadays, the whole system was set that way. So the Chinese, the Chinese, the unfriendly tweets were censored, thanks to her. She worked for People's Liberation Army for 7 years.
And Twitter had no problem
Twitter
with that?
has no problem. Twitter has no problem with that. Absolutely no problem. That's one, Twitter censorship. Let's see another company, YouTube. We all know YouTube. YouTube, even nowadays, ask the Chinese YouTubers, and ask Elma. Elma is very anti-CCP, right? Elma gained, after 2 months of start broadcasting, he got about 190,000 fans, and after that, not a single one. Subscribers.
This is our friend Elmer Yuan we're talking about, right?
This is our friend Elmer Yuan we're talking about. After reached the number 190,000, something like that, give or take, it stopped for a year and a half. Not one more subscriber. The subscriber number stopped. Mathematically impossible. Right?
Sasha, I can tell you that my Twitter account hasn't really grown. I don't think I'm that important that I should be shadow banned, but I wonder sometimes why I'm not adding any new subscribers. Certainly, I have a body of work to show for it. I would expect that by law of averages, 1 or 2 or 10, 20 would be, signing on to follow me on Twitter. I don't see it anyway. I'm not saying anything. Just
let me correct that. Actually, we talk about Twitter, and Elma's subscriber
was YouTube. Well, I think all these companies do some sort of a tagging or a carding. It's like, in soccer, you get this yellow card, you get this red card, and so on like that. I think they have
yellow
some
card
sort of
means
a
you don't
flagging
make
system.
Right. YouTube, if you say something, nowadays, the word evil cow in Chinese is censored. So if you say, I think CCP is an evil cow, you got censored. You got a yellow card. You got yellow cards 3 times, you're risking for permanent ban. And there are lots of words the Chinese figured out. So they would use a different word to replace it. The different word got censored. I'm talking about YouTube. That means they have the AI system to listen to what you say. So anyway, it has become a joke. And inside China, we're talking about outside China. Inside China, the Chinese big censorship war, fire war, the technology is provided by whom, guess? By many of these companies, especially Intel. Intel provides the first and perhaps the most important censorship software and equipment to China. I don't even know what to say.
Can you spell that for us, please? Can you spell that for us?
Intel company.
No,
Intel.
the product name.
Product. Well, it's censorship. I don't know the name of the product. I read it. It's because it's not a word. It's some sort of numbers and the things. So I don't remember. I can check it online later.
I see.
But
I see.
It's not one program. It's a series of programs. China used Intel, work with Intel to build its firewall. And the irony is that actually after Intel helped China that much, the Chinese was sponsored Huawei to drive Intel out. So it's irony and tragedy.
So if say Intel wants to legally proceed against China, where would they go? They can't sue them in China. Where would they go?
I have no idea. I really have no idea. Though they claim from the very beginning, every company who work with China claim that they will follow the local law. Just check their record. When they said they follow the local law, that means they can't sue China in China because that's the Chinese law. Well, quite an irony. That's censorship. So in China, nowadays, thanks to the big tech, compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, even with proliferation of internet, the Chinese have much less freedom of speech, less freedom of speech, unlike, So the funny thing is that, remember Bill Gates? Bill Gates said in the 1980s and 1990s, said many times that he said nobody could stop internet. Nobody could stop the free flow of information. When he went to China, when people criticized him, said, "How could you do that? How could you work so closely with the Chinese government?" Bill Gates said, "Well, that's for the free flow of information." And now we see the otherwise. And not only the Chinese government stopped free flow of information inside China, they are stopping free flow of information outside of China.
I think we have had instances of Elmer's hangouts being disturbed. So we know what you're saying. Elmer is sitting in DC at that point, and we get those disturbances. I wanted to tell our viewers one thing. There was in the, I think, late 80s, there was an Intel reverse engineered CPU that was run by some company. I think it may be Texas Instruments or some company, or maybe it was Compaq that had this processor. That processor was it was keeping up okay up until Intel's 80486. Then they changed the sequence. You used to have 8086, 186, 286, 386, 486. Then they changed the sequencing and said Pentium. The next one was a Pentium.
Right.
So somewhere that company that was trying to reverse engineer, they could not keep up with the scaling of Pentium. And I think it was National Semiconductor who bought it, and then it was sold to some company in China. So China got their hands on the Intel's processing, something for the outside world, it looked like an Intel chip. They got this thing fairly early on. I'm wondering, you said something that, Intel helped build the firewall for China, and then the Chinese government shoved Intel out and substituted them with Huawei. I bet you in this processor that I talked about has a role to play in this. It cannot be something else. I mean, you cannot take Intel as such a big behemoth. Some of the server chips are extremely complicated. To say that we don't need this, we have got an equivalent functioning thing. So I'm just putting that out in the minds of people. So Sasha, this was taking a little longer than I expected, but I want us to finish this one because there's so much more left. So hang on, guys. We are going to the next slide with your permission, or you want to talk about Apple on this one?
Yes, please go to the next one. And next one is important as well, but I suppose it would be shorter. And the national intelligence, national security for us, all these big companies, their technology had a lot of importance in or usage in national security, in weapon system, in orders. When they went to China, the Chinese first promised everything is civilian, nothing military. But in China, we have to understand everything can be military. And in the field of high tech, everything is military. That's so important. I'll give you one very simple example. I forgot which company. I forgot it's a silicon company. Work with Chinese retail. It's something like Walmart and called Jingdong. It's a very big company selling TV set and furniture, something like that. Oh, Amazon. They work with Amazon, with all the companies, and to develop what system? To develop a delivery system to deliver consumer goods. But that technology is directly applied to the military, according to some guy who wrote a paper in China and sort of a casually disclosed the truth, and later the paper was taken down from the internet. A researcher wrote it. So even a consumer good delivery system can be used. That system was used for the military logistics system. It is that simple. So, and but some companies went to China and worked with the Chinese, say, okay, we give you some technology for civilian use, and they might be innocent from their side. But some companies actually deliberately give China and work with the Chinese military. For example, a very big example is Bill Gates. Bill Gates first supplied China with all sorts of Microsoft products, and Bill Gates, after he left Microsoft, he worked with the Chinese to develop technology. And Peter Schweizer also mentioned in his book, and we saw that we have been laughing on this, it's Bill Gates. But the Chinese government ranked him one of the 50 most important people, foreigners, to China's development in the world. One of 50, including Karl Marx and Lenin and all that. He was in the list. So the worst project Bill Gates involved is China's nuclear technology, and it was a very big project. I'm looking at the Chinese report here. Bill Gates' company and the China Nuclear Energy they're working on the newest nuclear technology, which supplies not only civilian use, but mainly military use. They work it for 4 years to transfer technology to China. And finally, for some reason, I guess, some US government force intervened. And so that Bill Gates, actually, the whole project failed. The failure of the project does not mean, he's innocent. Does not mean he didn't have the intention to give China that technology. And how many such projects are involved? This one has been disclosed. We don't know how many of such projects, which still in hiding. Still, we don't know. So if you look at Chinese military, China now has a bigger navy than the United States of America. China has, at least as many nuclear weapons as we have. And China has a bigger military than us. And the Chinese military now is a serious threat, not only to neighboring countries like India, but to everybody in the world. So that's how the Silicon Valley, Peter Schweizer mentioned it, but he only mentioned a fraction of that program. So
there's one more slide to do, and then we can perhaps conclude and make our observations. Yeah. So I'm putting up that one. It is a social control. This is the most important one, in my opinion. Sasha, over to you.
Yeah, and look at the cameras. In big cities like Beijing, you cannot hide anywhere. The Chinese technology is developed to the extent that China can monitor everybody's movement in the entire country. That's how terrifying it is. First, if you think of China's cell phone network, China has much better cell phone network coverage than the United States of America. And everybody who went to China knows that. And the monitoring system, like or the cameras, has much, much more advanced technology. It's not that we don't have that technology, just, well, we have laws. You can't apply for this. And the Chinese, think of it, in big cities, all these cameras are equipped with facial recognition technology. And now they are also, well, gradually they're equipped with technology like recognizing the way you walk, the way your body moves. So that's the body move recognition, which means even you cover yourself, cover your face, you cannot hide. That's how scary. Just think of it, how scary that is. I'll give you one example, for the application of this new technology. Some people in the States think vaccine passport is a great idea. Let me tell you how vaccine passport works in China. China does not have a vaccine passport. China has a QR code. Every person has an individual QR code. Anywhere you walk to, in cities especially, if you don't have a QR code, you scan in a QR code, which shows it's green, you cannot enter any public sphere. Not only that, if your code turns red, you cannot leave your home.
Oh my God.
And if you have a QR code, say they call that a health code, and the health code is controlled by a center. Yeah, anyone who ask any Chinese, they can tell you the details. Your code, it's embedded in your phone. So you go anywhere first, scan the code. If the scan turns in the color green, you're fine. If you turn yellow, that means several things. First, you fail to test COVID-19 test in perhaps the past week. And you may have someone who next building of yours, well, close to you, who test positive. And your code will turn yellow. Whenever the code turns red, means either you tested positive or you refuse to do test. The central control system can turn your code red anytime. What happens when the code is turned red? Well, the place you live, every street and every courtyard has cameras. You are not allowed to go anywhere. And in some areas, even they put cameras in front of every door. And if the code is red, you can't move out your door. Actually, I have friends who came back to the States. They put you in a hotel for 2 weeks, and then they put a camera in front of your house. You have to stay there for another week. So 3 weeks. So what happened? In that hotel, the camera is pointing right at your door. How about you simply leave? So the camera will record you, record your movement, and they say, okay, your 2 weeks starts over again. You have, say, if you move out in 10 days, you have to start over for another 14 days. And that's how tightly the control is. And well, if you have a code, is that take on the bus, you scan the code in, the bus turns red, sorry, you can't go to the bus. And it doesn't only apply to people who test positive, it applies to people who refuse to test. That's how bad. That's how tightly controlled all this new technology, which are partly supplied by the foundation is supplied by the Silicon Valley. The social control in China is now so severe that the Chinese, it doesn't even make sense of living well. If your code turns red, you can't do anything. The government can jail you without coming to arrest you. That's how bad.
Now, Sasha, this book of Jerry Schweizer has been out for at least 8 to 10 weeks. Has there been any kind of activity, any statements, anything at all about all these different places and people and organizations?
I don't see that. I even don't see much media coverage. It's sad because in many ways we got so used to China being in our lives. And I guess Silicon Valley is also very used to get China, in their business, Wall Street as well, and the politicians as well. China is everywhere. And what our government said, Russia. Do you see Russians anywhere?
True. Good question. And I agree with you on that. Sasha, this program now, I guess, is close to finishing, and we have done any other thing you would like to add? I think that was the last slide.
Well, there are actually another 9 altogether, Peter Schweizer, at least 9 chapters altogether. We talk about 3 now, and then he talk about Hollywood and Wall Street and others. So I'm going to, put a few things together. I guess let's try to do 2 or 3 chapters next time.
Yes,
because
we will. Yeah.
It's not that people often ask me that, well, you worry about America's freedom being eroded by Chinese influence. I said, I don't worry about it because we have been eroded. We have to fight. Time to stop worry, time to start fighting.
Absolutely. And as always, Sasha, thank you so much. And viewers, I would strongly urge you to watch this program till the very end. And if you have come this far, please do like, share, and subscribe this program, forward it to your friends. Also subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Sasha spends a lot of time putting this together. You will not get all this stuff in the Red-Handed book. The Red-Handed book kind of set us a foundational template on which we have tried to build it. We are telling you, to the best of knowledge, our knowledge, this is the truth. And it's up to you. You don't have to take our word for it. If somebody else has a slightly different version, by Jove, you can come back, put in as comments. We try to answer your comments if they are valid, if they are on the topic. Just don't say you don't know what you're talking about, or don't use expletives. I mean, we want us to be, this should be an intellectually enriching conversation, and something that everybody takes a moment back, watches it, and thinks about it. Thank you once again, Sasha, and stay tuned. Next one will be on Hollywood, your favorite. Namaskar.
Okay, thank you.